The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Luke. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became a dazzling white. Suddenly, they saw 2 men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he had said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. The Gospel of our Lord.
O God, mercifully grant that we, being delivered from the disquietude of this world, may by faith behold the King in his beauty. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Disquietude. Disquietude is such an apt word for the world in which we live. We do not hear this word, disquietude, very much anymore. Our prayers often encode and preserve a language older than what we are used to, and this collect was written for inclusion into the prayer book in 1892, which is to say that this prayer has known and has been known in periods of disquietude. Now I find that I have bouts of disquietude on my mind. Perhaps you can think of a few reasons why. Perhaps you do too. But my experience of disquietude also helps me to see something in these Transfiguration stories of Moses and Jesus that I had not noticed before. About how in both stories dark clouds are circling. And these dark clouds, though they are there, they do not negate the glory of God. How often do we recognize brightness by also knowing darkness? And how does this contrast between glory and disquietude give us opportunity for growth? I'd like to start with what, at first blush, might be a strange story about Moses, who we read as constantly veiling and unveiling his face. That sounds familiar. Our reading from Exodus is the very end of chapter 34. But to understand this passage, we need to look at a few chapters before then, and then we need to look at the first 9 chapters of this chapter 34. First of all, what has just happened in Exodus is the immediate aftermath of one of Israel's most glaring failures, worshiping the golden calf. You might recall this part of the story. Moses has been up on Mount Sinai for nearly 40 days. But another way to say that is 6 weeks, right? Now that's a long time. And we who are reading this thousands of years after the fact know that Moses is okay. But the people do not. They do not necessarily know what has happened to Moses. What they could probably still see, however, is the smoke of God's presence and the flashes of divine lightning that were still visible. So at the very least, God is still around. In any case, the people tell Aaron, Moses must not be coming back. So let's make a new god. Aaron complies way too fast and asks the people for the gold necessary to make this idol. And we are told he fashions the calf himself. Then we are told that a completely wild hootenanny broke out until the sound of the whooping and drunken laughter makes its way clear up to Moses' ears and to God's ears. And God got so mad that God threatened to wipe out every last one of them and just start over with Moses. Moses convinced God not to do that, but then Moses goes down the mountain and he got so mad that he took the tablets containing the 10 Commandments and he just smashed them into 1,000 pieces. And when Moses got down there, no one really wanted to take responsibility for what had happened. Moses asks Aaron how the golden calf got made, and Aaron replies that he just put the gold into the fire and it came out a calf. Now, if you're a parent, you might be reminded of times that you talk to your child, and maybe your child says that he accidentally ate all the strawberries. But how do you accidentally eat an entire box of strawberries? You don't accidentally eat an entire box of strawberries. But enough about my week. In the aftermath of the golden calf incident, it was all very ugly and angry. Check out Exodus 33 for the rest of that story. And still you have to wonder, why would people choose a molten calf over a God they have been following for months and who has constantly manifested as a miles-high pillar of cloud and fire to lead them and to protect them and to save them from the Egyptians? One reason, at least, is that a God of your own hands will not challenge you. You can make that God love what you love and hate what you hate. You control that conversation. How often might we mistake our ability to control God with the trustworthiness of God? How often is our sense of God's trustworthiness linked to our sense of whether or not we are getting what we want or we are getting our desires met? An idol might let us down, but when that happens, we might just move on to a different idol, a different promise of fulfillment that could give us what we want and save us from chaos. But a living God demands a different relationship. All right, on to the first part of chapter 34. God and Moses start all over with literally a clean slate. New tablets are chiseled. God gives his law all over again. God then passes Moses in front of him, showing Moses one of the closest experiences of God in Scripture. Moses then comes down the mountain, and we pick up the story in the passage from today. Moses' shining face embodies God's steadfast love and faithfulness to Israel, despite the Israelites' confused and rebellious worship of the image of a calf they proclaim as the gods who brought us up out of the land of Egypt. The light of divine presence transforms Moses' appearance on an ongoing basis whenever he emerges from the tent of meeting after speaking with God face to face, as one speaks with a friend. Moses' face confirms that his plea for God's presence among the Israelites as they walk on from Sinai has been answered. And one thing that marks the difference between intercession to a God of our own making and a relationship with a living God is the necessity for continued conversation. Our commitment to constantly put ourselves in a place where we can hear and listen to God as God is. Moses serves in this passage as the mediator between God and Israel, and part of what it will mean for Moses to be the mediator between God and Israel is that God's continuous presence among God's people and his leading before God's people And it will mean giving service to and listening carefully to a living God, rather than just relying upon a remembrance of a memorialized experience, or clinging to an idolatrous monument upon which we can project our own changing desires. This importance of conversation and listening is borne out by the fact that in the 6 verses we read today from Exodus, there are 10 references to speech. And by the way, I think this is why the divine reaction to Peter's desire to build dwellings in our gospel reading is a voice from heaven saying, listen to Jesus. In these moments of appearing, the divine points us back to a living relationship rather than memorial. Memorial may give us lessons in times of disquietude, but the memorial is not a substitute for the voice of a living God. And God will not be silenced. Thank God for that. So the disquietude in Exodus is the incident of the golden calf. But the glory is not only on Moses' face. It can also be found in the reestablishment of the covenant between God and Israel. And that reestablishment sets a precedent of continuously coming back and being one with God again and again. And the good news in that story is that there is no sense of abandonment that is permanent. So what about the story of the Transfiguration in Luke? What's the disquietude there? This gospel story of the Transfiguration on the mountain appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In these passages, we are told that Jesus is talking to Moses and Elijah. This story has an effect of giving one a sense of who Jesus is. You can imagine it as a tableau in which like appears with like. Jesus, Moses, Elijah. But significantly, it is only here in Luke that we are told that that Jesus is talking with Moses and Elijah and what they are talking about. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Meaning that in the midst of all the glory and holiness and glowing faces, there is serious engagement with sin and evil going on. Moses and Elijah were there very specifically to talk to Jesus about his impending death and all that his sacrifice would bring to final fulfillment. In other words, in this middle of the story of this glory, there's darkness and disquietude. There was an engagement with something that is altogether common and mundane. But why Moses and Elijah? In one sense, they're the archetypal figures of the law and the prophets that culminate in Jesus, but I think there's more. These two men also experienced God nearly face to face. Nearly face to face. And they did so in the midst of the most trying times of their lives. We've talked a little bit about Moses today on Mount Sinai, but on a mountain, Elijah experienced God directly while on the run for his life from a queen bent on killing him. Who else would make sense for Jesus to talk to than these two, who had experienced the abandonment of the people and the violence of the state? Things that Jesus would see in Jerusalem. Jesus here on the mountain knows he's going to his death in Jerusalem. The Transfiguration does not negate what the horror of that experience will be, but it does show the resources God will give in disquietude. In what becomes a touchstone experience, I like to think that Jesus is encouraged by Moses and Elijah, who knew what it meant to be broken on the wheels of living. In what becomes a touchstone experience, Jesus is prepared for all the difficulties that are going to come. And he walks to the cross from this day forward, knowing the betrayals and the pain he will go through. In what becomes a touchstone experience, this moment of being shown who Jesus is and set to listening to him becomes what the apostles, including Peter, repeatedly refer back to as the hinge point in the story of Jesus and their testimony of a God who does not abandon anyone. And instead of memorializing this experience, Jesus and the disciples walk on. It's a touchstone experience. It's in the past. But it is there to point to the need to listen rather than glory in something a long time ago. Meanwhile, in moments of disquietude, what the apostles point to is not simply the past, but the reality of a God who is still speaking. Moses knew this too, and brought the Israelites back to this truth. Touchstone moments of God would not be memorialized in a statue to be controlled, but a living presence that showed them the way and gave them a living word. Beloved, when was your last touchstone experience? How might you be invited to the hearing of a new living word, speaking to you in the midst of the disquiet? May listening to this living God be fruitful. And when you open your eyes from prayer, may it not be to end your devotion, but to expect a kingdom alight within you and around you. Amen.